El coche. Te llevaste el coche.
Absolutely delighted to be back in Mexico. I think I see a lot of people here through the lights. I can only imagine all the people you represent. How many of you, how many children you represent? How many of you are the parents of children between 0 and 5 years of age? Okay, it works in Mexico, obviously. How many between 6 and 12 years of age? Worked even better back then. How many of you have teenagers? Just slowing down a bit. How many of you have grandchildren? Almost? Good. Well, it's lovely to have you here. Just going to get instructions here about the screen. Oh, there it is. That's magic. This topic is probably the most often requested topic. I used to actually refuse to speak on it. I think through my 40 years of private practice in parent consulting and clinical psychologist, being asked the most common question was, what do I do when? What do I do when? And I used to dread speaking about that topic, especially in the 30 years ago when I started, because I didn't know how to respond to it. People were looking for strategies, for skills, for an answer about what to do, when it couldn't be really answered that way. We had to make sense of the dynamics, because what works with one child doesn't necessarily work with another child. And what works at one time doesn't necessarily work at another time. And what may be totally appropriate for a 3-year-old is just dreadful for a 13-year-old. And so how to respond to this, how to be able to answer that question. And so gradually, as I studied developmental processes, developmental science, and discovered that attachment, the child's attachment to the adults responsible for them, was by far the most important factor, that it was all about relationship, and that's what my book is about. That is all about relationship. That as that came together, I had a context in which to finally answer the question. But the problem is that many of the things that would have made discipline work in the past are no longer present. Strong relationships with parents, a culture that supports right relationships with parents, having a lot more patience, being able to get a sense of them from inside out. There were so many things that are not there, and we're losing our confidence as parents. But what I want to do is I want to divide this material into 2 parts. First of all, I could call it the science of discipline. To be able to explain how it works when it works, how it meant to work, and what can go wrong when it doesn't work, and so you can have a sense of it, a sense of the science of being able to find your own way with this, your own decisions with this, with one child, the other child, and understand why the very same thing will work with one child and not necessarily another. So I'll attempt to answer this. I'll just pause for some instructions about the projector. I gather that we're having some difficulty with the projector. Well, it's showing here, not quite connected to your computer yet. What we have here is that what you'll see, hopefully, what you'll see is Spanish slides, but since I'm not good enough at Spanish, I have to have this computer in front of me with my English slides, and then I know what it is that I'm talking about when I'm referring to this. So that's the idea, and it should come fairly quickly. So I'll go ahead and then we'll catch up as we need to. The most important thing that I realized when I started putting together the material, writing my book on the child-parent relationship, is not simply the question of what to do when, but since relationship, the child's relationship with the parents and with grandparents, with teachers, the child's relationship with the adults was the most important thing, was the most significant issue. Then it was how to discipline without harming that. How do we impose order on a child? How do we impose order on their behavior without doing harm to the relationship, without doing harm to their development, to the process of growth? So it wasn't just simply a question of strategy. It was a question of understanding what was important. What were we meant to preserve? What was essential in this process? And so that's what I want to speak about. The subtitle of Making Sense of Discipline here is simply Discipline That Doesn't Divide. And it's the name of a chapter in my book, Discipline That Doesn't Divide, or I think in one edition it's called The 7 Disciplines That Don't Divide. And because I got asked the question all the time, well, if some of the things that we're doing with our children are harmful for the relationship, then what is it that we can do? What is it that, how can we go about this and preserve the relationship and preserve the healthy development? So that's what I want to answer. I'll go on in my own slides here and then catch up as we go along so that I can follow myself at least here. One of the greatest concerns I have is that most of the literature in parenting is about answering that question, what do I do when? And prescriptions are being given without any understanding of the implications, without any understanding of the costs. We wouldn't give pills, or we shouldn't give pills and medication. We shouldn't take them without understanding the side effects, the consequences. We wouldn't think of doing this. And yet it seems that, a book can come out, like 1, 2, 3 Magic in English, I don't know if it's in Spanish, other little strategies, the Ferber method in terms of how to get your child to sleep. You let them cry it out. All kinds of things are coming out, consequences, sending children to their room. And one by one, all of these strategies come out from individuals who are not scientists, who are not developmentalists, who have no appreciation of the need of the child to have a relationship with parents. And yet, because they're answering the question, people are thinking that this must be right, because somebody said it and it's in a book. And it's not. Although my book, I think you can trust, but there's a problem here. Yes, almost there. Change it, anyway. Yes. So that, again, is the reason why I like to provide a bit of understanding, a bit of background to this. And I'm an old-style professor, so that's what I do anyway. So since I was invited here, you'll just have to put up for the first half. You'll get the theory. In the second half, you'll get the practice. The good news is there's no exam. The bad news, you have a lifetime to implement it. There's all kinds of ways to be able to put the material together. And so we'll go to, again, I said I was part 1, that we would go to here why discipline works when it does, and why it doesn't work. When it doesn't, just click it ahead one more, and then I think we'll be on. And here, I'll just get it. There we go. Okay. And then part 2, a dozen guidelines for discipline that is attachment safe and developmentally friendly. And so the kind of thing that will not harm their healthy development, their emotional development, and will not harm their relationship. So I'm going to start here. It may seem surprising to you how I start, but hopefully it will make sense. I'm going to start with why yelling works when it does. Okay? Why does yelling work? Who hasn't yelled at their children? Hasn't? Okay. I think most of us have yelled at our child from time to time. Yeah? It's instinctive to yell at our children. Absolutely instinctive. Why? We've been yelling at children for tens of thousands of years. We have. That's what we do. Why do we yell? Why do we yell? So we yell, say, hurry up. And when we yell, we expect something to happen. Actually, what we're doing instinctively is evoking alarm in them. We actually trigger, scientifically, the alarm system. So the alarm system goes off when we raise our voice. What we want to see is their eyes rivet towards us, like this, leaning forward, and we want them to say, what? That's exactly what we want to do. And then we say, you better watch out, you're going to get into trouble. You know, look where you're heading. This isn't good. You're asking for it. And we do 1,000 ways in which we fill it in. But the first part was we yelled, and instinctively we tried to evoke their alarm system. We triggered this off. The alarm, the mechanism involved is the alarm system. And we know there's a large part of the brain that is dedicated to this alarm system. We know that it's active already by 6 months in gestation, the fetus. Although we shouldn't yell at our fetuses, that's not good. But it's all getting set up there so to move the child to caution. If we have a good working alarm system, we are moved to caution, to become conscientious, careful, and concerned. Now, what more could we ask for a child? If a child was careful, cautious, conscientious, and concerned, isn't this what it is about? In fact, if it had a working, remember, think, the brain has a working alarm system that is meant to keep a child out of harm's way and out of trouble. You see, nature already had this thing figured out. We have been designed or evolved in an incredible way. And so what we do is we trigger that alarm, and again, we want the limbic system, the emotional brain, we want to go into agitation. We want the cerebral cortex to go into what? And then we fill it in. The problem is, the human alarm system is a very fragile thing. It has a very narrow range of functioning, and boy, does it give us trouble. And when you have a child whose alarm system isn't working, that child is not careful, concerned, conscientious. Got the other one. Somebody help me. There were, yes, I think there were 4 C's, but anyway, we'll move on. You got the idea of it. So how does the alarm system work? Well, this could be a whole course at university, so obviously I'm going to give it to you because in Mexico City I heard you're incredibly bright, and especially in this neck of Mexico City. So this is a crash course on the alarm system. I'm going to put it in terms of the anatomy of alarm from that which we are usually most aware of, our perceptions of what's wrong, of what's alarm, to feelings, and we're going to differentiate between feelings and emotions. That feelings are the conscious part. Emotions are there. We share those with all creatures with a limbic system. And all creatures, all mammals, have an alarm system. And that is what's meant to move them to caution, move them to become or to be concerned, and so on. That is meant to keep them out of trouble and out of harm's way. And so all of this is part. Emotions are always the center of it. And there's a chemistry of alarm and a physiology of alarm. It's incredible, but again, very, very fragile. The prerequisites for effectiveness are very simply a child needs to be able to feel alarmed and to see what alarms. A child needs to be able to, ironically, feel unsafe, say, I'm scared, I'm frightened. There are a surprising number of children who do not say that. When I worked with delinquents, you rarely heard them say, I'm scared. You rarely ever sensed in them that they felt unsafe. The reason they got into trouble, and we took pictures of their brains, and we found out the alarm system wasn't working at all. No wonder they couldn't keep out of trouble. I worked with kids in the 3 prisons, adolescents in 3 prisons. Their alarm systems weren't working. That's why they were not moved to caution. But we're finding a surprising number of 4-year-olds who can no longer say, I'm scared, I'm frightened, I don't feel safe. The problem is that when you lose your feelings of alarm, automatically you're reckless, you're not moved out of harm's way. Now you know you're going to get into trouble, but nothing alarms you to do this. And that's part of the problem. Now, all you have to do, we have a medication. In fact, we have a drug that works directly on the alarm system so that you feel no alarm. And you know what that is. That's alcohol. And all you have to do is add some alarm and the anesthetic to you, and you realize how much trouble you can get into. And you've got the equation. You've got the equation. It is there. We were meant to have this. It is for effectiveness. And so the risks involved in alarming a child, the irony is that the more we alarm a child, the more they become defended against that place, against the thoughts and feelings, and the less they are moved to caution. So that when we yell at children relatively much, it is so vulnerable a place, they're so wounded, their alarm system becomes defended, they lose their feelings, and they're no longer moved to caution. And that's exactly what we find. We must use this sparingly. Children need soft hearts. Ironically, they need to feel that alarm, to be as cautious and conscientious as we want them to be. This is a huge part of discipline. If this was working, we wouldn't need to worry about it. And again, I'll just put this out, defend it against vulnerability. Humans are incredibly fragile creatures. We're easily wounded. And if the vulnerability is too much to bear, the brain evokes defenses against it. Now, there's different levels of defenses. At one level, the child simply doesn't see trouble coming. Doesn't see what alarms. These are the children that are always playing with the kids they shouldn't play with. They are the ones who can't seem to realize where the bullies are. They can't keep out of harm's way. They can't see the lack of invitation to exist in another person's eyes. They can't see this, and so they talk way too much. And because they're not moved to caution. And we have many of those children. And you know that. You deal with that. At a deeper level, and many children of these are suffering from anxiety, which is simply alarm without eyes. They're full of agitation, full of apprehension, but moved to caution for the wrong things. Because of the dark, because of monsters under the bed, because of all kinds of phobias, they're moved to caution for the wrong things because they can't see what's really scaring them. And if we go further, and a child loses his feelings, now all we have is agitation, restlessness, and this is increasing in our children. Incredible restlessness, and it grabs the attention, so the attention can no longer be used for other things. A child can't attend very well because this is the highest priority in the attention system is alarm. And when it grabs our attention, we have a hard time concentrating on anything. And these children are full of agitation, restless, but they have lost their ability to say, I'm scared. And then there's an even deeper place where a child no longer feels so agitated. The physiology doesn't work very well anymore. And now they get excited when they should be alarmed. So when they know they're going to get into trouble, these children look for the adrenaline rush. They will ride the roller coaster over and over and over again just for the adrenaline rush. Whenever something goes wrong, when it feels like they're going to, something bad is going to happen, it actually gives them They're attracted to what alarms. They start selecting for horror movies. And we have many of these children are increasing. These children are a nightmare to parent. You can't keep them out of trouble. They're actually attracted to trouble. Now, we try to discipline these children. We try to discipline. We try to give them consequences and all these things. We don't realize that something systemically is wrong. They have lost the alarm system. The alarm system is dysfunctional. If the alarm system was working, and those of you know whose alarm system was working in elementary school, when you were in grade school, oh, were you cautious, conscientious, careful, concerned? I got all four of them. And you realize that, no, for the most part, you were a good kid. Why? Because you could stay out of trouble. That's why. It had nothing to do with discipline. It had nothing to do with how your parents used discipline at home. Nothing to do with whether they had a heavy hand. It had to do that you had a functioning alarm system. And so that's one of the first things to realize. If a child can't say, I'm scared anymore, if the child can't see trouble coming, if the child can't stay out of harm's way, if they no longer feel nervous, you know there's a deeper problem. That's why they're getting into trouble. All the discipline in the world will not fix this. What needs to be fixed is the alarm system. The good news is it can come back, but we have to soften their heart for this to happen, to make it safe. So this last one was about the adrenaline. That is, they're lacking agitation and apprehension. So let me go on here. This suggests that our scare tactics can backfire dreadfully. There are whole cultures that use scare tactics for children with dreadful results. Germany, at the turn of the last century, had the first parenting manuals ever and developed a whole pedagogy around scaring your child. Oh, if you masturbated, you go blind. You'd be the death of your, me. All of these kinds of things. And it had things for everything. Scary stories. And it was too much. There's one psychoanalyst, Alice Miller, that actually links the family practices and parenting practices of the Germans after the turn of the last century in the early 1900s with the steps towards the First and Second World War. It's amazing. But we had a whole generation of defended boys. Absolutely defended, who actually sought the adrenaline rush. And we're doing this again as if we haven't learned our lessons. We're doing this again. Scare tactics can backfire. We must be careful. Yes, the alarm system is wonderful. It is important, it's pivotal in keeping a child out of trouble. But we need to protect it. We need to yell sparingly at our children. I could always tell when I was in parenting practice that if I would have a parent who was a yeller, I knew they had a child with an alarm system problem. Right? Because what happens when you yell and you don't get the desired effect? Instead, you get wooden eyes, a wooden face, and you realize that you haven't got the desired effect. What you don't realize is this child is defended against alarm. But it feels like you have no effect, so what do? You yell louder, yes. And you still don't have the desired effect, so you ramp it up a bit. And that's the problem. Every time we ramp it up, the defenses come up as well. And tomorrow we have more problems. The child is more reckless, more careless, less concerned, and so on and so on. That's why we need to know this. The answer to a child, who doesn't respond to the occasional yell is not yelling more. It's the fact that, oh my goodness, there's a deeper problem here. This child has lost his soft heart. He no longer feels the tender feelings of alarm. Let me go on. There's many questions I want to answer here in the first point before we go on to this. Now, this will really surprise you. What is a clinical psychologist ever doing talking about spanking anyway? Well, first of all, let me tell you, we've been spanking for thousands and thousands of years. Hundreds of cultures for thousands of years discovered this, and there's a reason for it. There's actually a reason for it. Don't get me wrong, I'm not recommending it. Okay, so don't get me wrong. I once gave a lecture in Canada, and somebody was there from our national broadcasting agency. It said, Canadian developmental psychologist believes that parents should spank, and it spread throughout Europe. I got more invitations for interviews, and it was just amazing. Don't get me wrong on this, but we need to understand it. The mechanism that's involved is one of the most important mechanisms. But first of all, of course, if you say you're going to get a spanking if you do that, and a child has a working alarm system, it should scare them a bit, move them to caution, right? And so the alarm system. But there's an even more significant system. It's the brain's discipline system that is phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. It's the adaptive system. And the adaptive system is when a child comes when encounters futility. Well, the spanking was always a symbol. There's nothing left to do but cry. This isn't going to work. There's no more words. There's no more sense arguing. Everything, this is the end of the line. And so it was our communication that it was futile to try to change mommy's mind, daddy's mind, the circumstances. It was futile. Now the word futility is when we're up against that which we cannot change. Humans are the most potentially adaptive creatures of all. But it is not inevitable. The process of adaptation requires the child to be able to feel the futility they have encountered. You say, well, what do you mean, feel futility? It's an incredibly important feeling. When you actually come up against, and when a 3-year-old comes up against mommy's no, daddy's no, there's no more stories tonight, that's all now. No, there's this is, we're leaving now. When they come up with the futility, it's supposed to move them. And the movement, emotionally, they're supposed to get it, that it won't work, can't work, that they can't change mommy's mind. When the child feels the futility, the limbic system, the emotional brain, the command center is called the amygdala of the emotional brain. And it sends signals to the lacrimal glands, and the eyes water. And so we have associated for thousands of years tears with the encounter with discipline. The Greeks, in fact, knew this was so important to civilization, knew it was so important to create a culture that was civilized, that they called the big futilities in life tragedies. And they created tragedies that in plays, the symbol of which was the tears, that their populations went to be able to foster that process of being able to move frustration, that which doesn't work, to sadness when we come up against this. So the feelings of sadness and disappointment are these feelings of futility. These are absolutely essential. We have so many children doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. That doesn't work. And how many adults do we have that are likewise? How many adults have you heard saying, I've told you 1,000 times not to do this? 1,000 times? This is not adaptive. Why would you ever do anything more than 2 or 3 times? That didn't work. In other words, this adult has not felt the sadness, tears on the inside, around the futility, and is doing the same thing over and over and over again. That doesn't work. Do you follow me? It's the same thing. This is the same thing. The whole issue of discipline. Let's stop doing what doesn't work. We'd be way ahead if we just started that, but we have to feel our sadness about it. We're thinking the answer lies in our cerebral cortex. The answer doesn't lie in the cerebral cortex. It lies in the limbic system. Adaptation is an emotional process. And if a child has lost his ability to say, I'm scared, he's also lost his tears of futility. Now, children can cry over all kinds of things. Onions, upset. They can cry over all kinds of things, but these tears of futility are very special. By 5 years of age, you can cry them on the inside, because sometimes you get too ashamed when you cry them on the outside. But they must be there. And they're the key to nature's discipline process. So what was the issue of spanking? Very simple. We intuitively felt, as parents, we have lost it in our generation, but our great-grandparents would have intuitively sensed that when they gave us a no and we were arguing with them, and we kept on arguing and trying to change mommy and daddy's mind, no was supposed to represent futility. When something didn't work, they intuitively knew that we must have our tears. So what do they do? Just hurry it on a little bit. And the spanking was meant to be that symbol that there's nothing left to do but cry. Because they intuitively knew that that was part of the equation. We've lost all that wisdom. I'm not at all suggesting we go back to it, but that's why it worked when it did. And that's why it didn't work when it didn't. Because if a child is spanked and doesn't find his tears, or his tears is lost, it will harden him up even further. And that's what all the research shows us. That's why 30 countries in our world have outlawed spanking. Because all the research is coming in saying that when children spank relatively much, their children, we have huge problems with the children. They are not adaptive. They have all kinds of difficulties, including aggression, which I'll talk about. So we need to use, but what we did is, and I hope this translates into Spanish, is we threw the baby out with the bathwater. The analogy. We threw what was important out with this. We forgot the role of tears in discipline. When our children do not feel their sadness when they encounter futility, they do not adapt. They do not learn from mistakes. They do not learn from consequences. They do the same thing over and over again. That doesn't work. I'll go to it later. Today's consequences are supposed to be the modern spanking. Because a consequence is when you say to a child, I can take this away from you, or do this or do that, and there's nothing you can do about it. So it's supposed to be representation of this fact, that this is a confrontation with futility. And now we know that consequences don't teach a child after all. You see, we thought it was the cerebral cortex, it was logic, it was rational thinking. No, it's emotion. When a child doesn't feel sad about the consequence, the failure, the exam, whatever it is that happened, they have no learning, and in fact, it hardens them even further. That's why it's so important when one child's medicine can be another child's poison. And you know, you have to realize what it was meant to do. Well, let's go on in this. This is the picture of the analogy of the brain. Even the brain works this way. It's not the breakthroughs. It's the encounter with futility that's important. When a child encounters futility, that's when the maze is walked. And that's the way our children are meant to be. When they feel sadness about something not working, but we got to be there to collect that sadness. We got to make it easy. And we got to be able to do it without harsh means. And there's ways of doing it, but if they're not, nature cannot discipline them. Or looking at it this way, this maze, that there's many more things that will not work than will. But for have a child who can walk that maze and become adaptive in life, able to handle not getting their own way, able to handle things not working, be adaptive to it. They've got to be able to have their sadness about the things that do not work. And again, we've lost that process. We're so rational now in our thinking. We try to use reason. We try to use all kinds of things and don't realize it's an emotional process. And so the prerequisites for functioning here is the heart has to be soft enough to feel both alarmed, to feel scared, and to feel sadness. And if the child isn't, you're going to have discipline problems, guaranteed. If your child does not move from mad to sad spontaneously, you're going to have discipline problems. If a child doesn't say, I'm scared, you're going to have management problems. You're going to have all kinds of discipline problems. And it will occur to today's parent that it's because I don't know what to do. I haven't read the right book. I don't have the right strategy. If only somebody told me what to do. And so then the question comes, what do I do when? But it's because our children are becoming dysfunctional. That's why we have the problem. Not disordered. They're losing their feelings, which are the most important part of us as humans, we've discovered. We must be able to feel our emotions. We have been so concerned about behavior, so concerned about academic performance, so concerned about outcomes, so concerned about excellence. We've been so concerned about disorder and diagnosis that we forgot the most important part of all. When children can't feel their tender emotions, nothing goes right. And we have all kinds of problems, and that's the most significant thing that we need to understand. So the risks involved, of course, in spanking a child is high risk of emotional hardening, which numbs out the feelings of alarm and futility, leading to alarm and even aggression problems. And the way it works this way is aggression, the attacking energy, is the very end result of frustration, simply the emotion of something not working in a child. When a child is frustrated and they've been unable to change what counts, they've hit a wall of futility, but they have not had their tears. The futility hasn't sunk in. When we're up against the things that we cannot change, again, we must have our sadness. If we don't, that's where frustration turns foul. And in foul frustration, we feel like hitting, striking, smashing, whatever it is, physically, psychologically, emotionally, insulting, hitting ourselves, attacking our own dignity. I'm no good at things, even suicidal impulses. And so aggression always indicates in a child that that child has not yet had his tears about the things he cannot change in his life. Do you follow me? So I'll say that again. Aggression in us as an adult, when we have attacking energy in ourselves, and in a child, when there's attacking energy in there, tells us that the child has not yet had his sadness and disappointment or symbolic inner tears about the things that he cannot change in his life. Now, how do we respond to kids who have aggression? We look for consequences, right? How am I going to teach him a lesson he won't forget? How am I going to tell him aggression doesn't pay? So, what am I going to do? I'm either going to send him to his room, ignore a tantrum, or I'm going to give a consequence. Tell me, does that make a child more frustrated or less? Look at this. More frustrated, so what are we going to get? More aggression. More aggression. Absolutely. You see, the problem wasn't that. The problem was here. That's the problem. The issue in discipline is to take tantrums to tears. To be able to open the underside of it. This is what the issue is. We've got to think deeper. So the ironies involved in spanking a child, of course, is that if a child is soft enough to feel alarm, and soft enough to feel sadness and disappointment, spankings are redundant, unnecessary. Totally unnecessary. Because if a child is soft enough to feel this way, all you have to do is put a little bit of sadness in your voice. Oh, honey, that's not what you wanted, was it? And away we go. All you have to do is put that tone in your voice where the child knows there's nothing left to do but feel sad. And if they can't feel sad, they will. We can find it in all kinds of ways. The answer to this is not discipline. There's no kind of discipline that you can think that isn't going to make things worse with aggression. The answer is to get their feelings back. Same with alarm. A child who's no longer moved to caution, who's reckless and careless, the answer is not discipline, it's to get their feelings back. Then nature can do its job. Nature meant to move us to caution, meant to be able to prune out behavior that didn't work. Let me go on to, spanking is also savage, yes, sabotage the very conditions required to be effective. Why feigning or facing separation works when it does. By feigning separation, I mean this trick we use with our little 2- and 3-year-olds, It's time to go now. I don't want to go. We have to go. I don't want to go. Can't make me. All right, bye-bye then. Then we get a panic attack in the child. Huge panic attack, pursuit of proximity. The same kind of thing is, your friends are going to like you if you do this, you'll be the death of me if you behave that way, and all of those kinds of things is what we do is we push the child's face into separation. And it has phenomenal impact. Phenomenal impact. Why it works? It works because nothing traumatizes us, affects us more than facing separation. Nothing does. It is what affects us more than any other thing. And so it evokes huge emotions of alarm and pursuit to move us to caution. If I can do it this way, facing separation moves us to alarm, meant to move us to caution. Mommy, I promise I'll never do that again. Honest, and they'll promise you the moon. And, proximity responses and alarm. And so we say, you see, it worked. It worked. Look at how well this works. And so our generation has done a whole other number around us. We withdraw the invitation to exist in our presence. We send them to their room and behave. We promise them a time out, all facing separation. Works the first few times. Because it is so powerful in its impact. The problem is this. This is only part of the story. First of all, the prerequisites for effectiveness, the child must be attached to the person where proximity is threatened. Otherwise, it doesn't work. If somebody threatens separation with them and they're not attached to them, it's not going to work. So it doesn't work outside of the context of attachment. And the child must not be defended against feelings of alarm or of the attaching instincts. If a child is defended against caring, is saying, I don't care, it doesn't matter, whatever, this isn't going to work, this is going to make matters hugely worse. But the risks involved in pushing a child's face into separation are huge. It creates insecurity. Then the child never feels secure. And that's the bottom line in healthy emotional development and personality development, is that you can take for granted that mom and dad will hold on to you, that the connection is secure, that nothing will come in between, nothing will divide us. Security is everything. We've known this for scores of years already. What are we doing using a mechanism that renders children? We're saying basically that, honey, I value your behavior at the instant more important than your security in the relationship and your emotional health. That doesn't make any sense at all. It causes alarm problems where the separation is too much to handle. The way to get a child, the alarm system dysfunctional, is to push their face into separation. It evokes frustration, which can lead to aggression problems. The problem is this, I didn't show you the whole story. There's another emotion that's evoked at the same time. If the child can't find his tears, we've got an aggression problem. So we've got alarm problems, we have huge pursuit problems, and we clinging and clutching and various kinds of things and collecting and hoarding. We've got all kinds of things developing out of pursuit problems, that a child gets addicted to contact and closeness. You can see this in their texting, their, what do you call it in Mexico? Messaging? Well, yeah, you know that. I still didn't get it, but you know. Anyway, so you've got all kinds of problems, but this doesn't tell the story, the whole story. There's another level. When the separation is too much to bear, it leads to a defendedness. The next level, when the separation is too much to bear, we've got problems. Now we've got, it's not safe for the child to depend. And that's hugely important. Children need to feel safe. It's safe to depend upon us. When we use the relationship against them, it triggers alpha instincts. So they become bossy, prescriptive. They become domineering and dominant, telling us, having to have the last word. And these children are impossible to manage. They don't take orders. They just like to give orders. And they're not receptive. We're having a whole generation of alpha children happening. We have defensive reattachment. Children who say, well, my peers, my friends are easier. I get less hurt or less wounded. In fact, this is not true, but they think this way. And so they start attaching to their peers because it seems to be a better bet than their parents or grandparents. And we have a whole generation of children who are orbiting around their peers rather than their parents and their grandparents. And again, we can't raise children who are not attached properly to us. And then, of course, there's a flight from vulnerability. We lose our feelings. When I was working with delinquents, they had 80% less feeling than normal adolescents. 80%. And now this is happening early at 4 and 5 years of age, where we're finding children losing their feelings. But we're so concerned about behavior, we don't even realize it. When they start losing their tender feelings. Children who are bored, who can't say, who say, I don't care, doesn't matter, whatever. When they are not able to talk about these feelings, this is what the issue is. Discipline cannot fix this. When children have their tender feelings, they need relatively little discipline. Relatively little, because the alarm system works. They can stay out of trouble. The other systems works fine. So what we've done, we've taken a dreadful wrong turn in our generation. Maybe not you here in Mexico, but if you haven't taken this turn, let me warn you not to do this. Because we've taken this turn in the United States and Canada. It's estimated, according to the research, that over 65-70% of young parents today are using separation as their panacea. Some form of separation as discipline. This is hugely wrong. Hugely wrong. When we push a child's face into separation, all kinds of ways we do. If you won't be able to stay with us if you don't behave. This is common in foster homes sometimes and those kinds of things. Or even when children have split parents. I need a break from you, or you're too much to handle. This pushes a child's face into separation. Get to your room, or get out of my sight responses. Ignoring the silent treatment responses, and so on. Any form of separation or isolation or love withdrawal, or the anticipation of such. And includes today's runaway preoccupation in the United States and entering into Canada, hope not here, with contracts and ultimatums that involve separation as a possible outcome. The problem is that we're hardening the hearts of our children. We are desperate to try to find a way to control, not knowing what the issue is. They lose their feelings, it gets worse. It adversely affects the relationship. Who would want to fall into attachment with someone who used the relationship against you? We wouldn't do this as adults. If somebody said to us, Susan, I'd like you to do this for me, but if you don't, I won't do I won't do the thing for you that I know you'd like. You say, oh my goodness. The person doesn't believe in our desire to make things work for them in the relationship. We feel insulted. And yet we routinely relate to our children in such ways. And again, facing separation is one of the most harmful ways. So, why feigning? Why it doesn't work? The irony, what was initially presented, the irony here is that when spanking was outlawed in the United States, in many of the states, and in Canada, or at least moving on the books to be such, the pediatricians were commissioned to be able to get an alternative. And what was the alternative? Timeouts. The alternative was timeouts. Why? And it was used by sending a child to his room. Why? Because the pediatricians were concerned. We don't want a parent to hit their child, so we need to get the child away from a parent who has lost their temper. That was what it was. Who should have got a timeout? The parents. Exactly. Exactly, not the children. This was never meant as a discipline measure. This was meant to protect children from being abused. And now it's become a panacea. It was never meant to do this. And so you can see that it still makes sense. If your child is in danger of getting abused by you, hit by you, struck by you, whatever it is, when they've crossed the line, then yes, it would be better to send them to their room. But it would be better yet for you to send yourself to your room. and to be able to get a hold of your own sadness and tears about the things that are not working. So we've got a lot of growth to do here. It's largely about us, this process. Why refusing contact at bedtime can work for getting a child to sleep. I'm just going to go through this very, very briefly because it makes my blood boil. When you see this thing that has now become the panacea for young American mothers who believe that they can get a child to sleep by closing the door, by refusing contact. Why does it work? Because sleep is our ultimate defense. Sleep is our ultimate defense. In the nursery, in the neonate nursery, those of you that work in the hospital will know this. We used to think that children, babies, infants, used to sleep a whole lot when they were in the nursery in the hospital. And then we finally figured out, we turned the lights down, we turned the noise down, we turned the stimulation down, they all woke up. Imagine. They all woke up. Sleep was a defense. The ultimate defense is to go to sleep. And so when the stress is too much, when the child is facing the separation, you can actually see it work, how they go to sleep. If you don't believe me, some of you actually have husbands who still do this. You talk about anything that's stressful, and they suddenly get very tired. Sleep is the ultimate defense. But at what cost? At what cost? You see, this is the problem. At what cost? And this is the thing, when we are treating our populace as if they're ignorant, and we give them prescriptions for this, and we have no idea of the mechanisms behind, that's what leads to so much harm. That's why I want people to understand the science of discipline. The prerequisites for effectiveness here is the predisposition to become defended at that level. So stress must make you sleepy. If you don't have an infant where stress makes them sleepy, this won't work. If you don't have a husband where stress makes them sleepy, this won't work. The risks involved in using isolation at bedtime, oh my goodness. When we push a child's face into separation, it has all the risks involved in it. It risks disabling the adaptive process because the tears are the most important. Children must cry relatively much in their first 5 years of life, ever to be adaptive as they need to be by the time they go to school. And they need to cry safely in the arms of those that they're attached to. Crying by yourself to sleep at night is the worst possible scenario for a child. It doesn't make sense. And they lose their tears. That's why it's so important, why isolation at bedtime can backfire all our ancestors. The answer was not less attachment, the answer was more. When a child had a hard time going to sleep at night, you increase the contact and closeness. The smells, put your nightie around them, and so on. I'm just a big baby. I travel a lot. And I have a hard time going to sleep in some hotel rooms, and so I take my wife's pillowcase with me. It's the same thing. I'm just a big baby. No, it works. It does that. But the idea is you increase attachment. You don't decrease it. You help the child hold on to you when apart. That's the whole issue. That's the most important thing, is how do we hold on to each other when apart? And that's how we help the baby hold on to us when apart. We work in different ways to be able to provide this. That's the action. It sabotages the process by which a child comes to adapt to that which they cannot change. Well, let me go on. A few more minutes and 10 more minutes here and we'll take a break. Why consequences work when they do? Why do they do? Now, consequences and timeouts. Again, the majority of today's parents, I don't know the research in Mexico, so I don't know this. The thing I've always felt about Mexico is you're much closer to your traditions. The thing that is happening is something in the last generation, when people have become pure-oriented and lost some of the culture and tradition. But you're much closer to a working culture than we in Canada are and in the United States. So you have something that is rich. And so when I speak to you this way, I just speak to you, don't let it go. Don't let it slip away. You had a culture that was working. When you go to some of the things, you follow us that are happening where we have lost that culture. They're not working. They're not working. Now, why do consequences? Consequences have become a panacea, especially in school systems. Everybody is thinking we got to teach a lesson. We got to teach a child a lesson. by a consequence. Get it through the child's mind. The mechanisms involved in this are quite phenomenal. One mechanism is attachment. As I mentioned before, separation from what one was attached to. And so if the consequence is separation, then it evokes alarm and pursuit. But if it's too much, all the other kinds of things as well. Adaptation, which I already mentioned, a confrontation or a consequence is a confrontation with futility. So if we say, well, just let the child be late for school, they'll learn. Not if they don't feel sad about what happened. Let the child fail at an exam. They'll learn. Not if they don't feel sad about what happened. Let's ground the child for 2 months. They'll learn. Not if the child did not feel sad about what happened. It will harden them up further. You'll have twice the trouble with this child. Now, do you follow me? It wasn't the consequence. It was the feelings of futility that are meant to accompany it. So adaptation must be there or else it won't work. And a very important process, an incredible process, but the integrative process. A child must be able to think twice, be confronted with a tempering element. You see, how we're meant to work as adults, if you've got a good prefrontal cortex, the front part of the brain, is supposed to be 6 times larger, even at the start, than our chimpanzees and so on. And so this is the part that is meant to make us truly civilized and human. This is the key thing, and it's very simple. It doesn't even start until 5 or 6 or 7 years of age, this prefrontal cortex, developing it. And it's all about being able to experience mixed feelings. So part of me feels this, I feel a hug in me for my sister, but, I'll start the negative. I feel a hit in me for my sister, but I have a hug in me for her too. I want to call my teacher names, but I know I would get into trouble. I feel like smashing something, but I don't. But I don't want to lose that toy or whatever it is. There's on the other hand. Now, when you think of your 3 and 4-year-olds, you see what you never hear them saying is, I'm feeling rather ambivalent today. I'm having conflicted feelings. See, part of me feels like doing this, but on the other hand, part of me feels like hurting you, but I don't want to, I love you. You never hear a 4-year-old say that. The problem is when you never hear a 14-year-old say that. You see, if everything was developing well, and the prefrontal cortex is actually an extension of the limbic system, the emotional system. So if a child has all his feelings, then they begin to mix. Part of me feels this way, part of me feels that way. And when he feels moved to do this and moved to do that, that's what arrests that movement. That's the answer to impulsiveness and the beginning of civilized behavior. When kids have problem behavior, it's because they're impulsive. They're driven out of one emotion at a time. The problem is not that they don't know that it will lead to trouble. The problem is they can never feel the conflict when they need to. So haven't I told you 1,000 times that if you hit your sister, we'll take this away from you? Yes. Then why did you do it? I don't know. Haven't we gone over this? Yes. Did I not tell you this would be taken away from you? Yes. Then what was going on in your mind? Nothing. And that's the answer. When you feel the impulse to attack, and if a child is not capable of mixed feelings, the prefrontal cortex does not work, it won't save them from that impulse. And that is the issue. You see, the brain does not work on a cut-it-out system. The brain works on an add-in system. We are always saying to our kids, cut it out, cut it out, cut it out, cut it out. The brain doesn't do that. The brain says, there is an answer to every single troubling impulse. Every single one. I'm scared of this, Mommy, but I'm excited about that too. Every single troubling impulse has an answer, but it requires time to develop and a soft heart. And by the time a child with a soft heart was some time, the very intense children, it's more like 8, 9, 10 years of age. And then it goes through a whole new thing in adolescence, because in adolescence, they have a brand new consciousness, and they're flooded with feelings that don't mix very well. And so from 13 to 15, if everything is going ideal, they look as impulsive as they did when they were 3 to 5 years of age. But if they find their mixed feelings, and that is our issue. Not discipline, not consequences, but helping them find their mixed feelings. It is incredible how it can bring them to civilized, considerate behavior. Nature's answer is in the integrative process. But if a child doesn't have it, a child can't think twice. If a child never says, part of me feels this way and part of me feels that way, the integrative process is not working yet. The consequences won't help. No matter how much you get something through their thick head, no matter how many times you talk about it, it won't be there when they need it. And no matter how good their intentions are, I'm going to bring my homework home from school, I won't do this, I won't do that, I promise I'll do this, and then as soon as another impulse goes, they've lost their good intentions. Not because they didn't have them, because they can't have, there's no inner conflict. So nature had an answer, but his parents were way too much in a hurry. Way too much in a hurry. And we think we can get things done from the outside, when really nature had an answer for all of this from within. And the answer here, as I said, is in the prefrontal cortex. The prerequisites for effectiveness, able to feel futility when it is encountered, that's the attachment part of it, be capable of mixed feelings and thinking twice, and this has to do with the prefrontal cortex. And this is so key. And so, why consequences work when they do? The risks involved here in using consequences as a discipline method. There are risks here too, just like there were in spankings and in yelling. And the risks are all the risks of separation-based methods if we're using separation as a consequence. All the risks of hardening if the child is not moved to sadness, not moved to this. For instance, a child, when we take away, we're saying to a child, if you don't do this, I'm going to take away this privilege. If a child is already hardened because he's attached to this thing, within a day, hours sometimes, within days, I don't care, it doesn't matter, whatever. We've hardened him even further. See, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It doesn't make sense in terms of this. We've got to approach it a bit differently. The problem with consequences also is they let a child know what you want. And if a child isn't attached to you, doesn't have a good relationship with you, or those attachment instincts are not engaged at that time, there is this instinct in us as humans, in all of us, where we don't like to be pushed around. We don't like to be told what to do. And the only thing that trumps it for us is that when somebody tells us what to do, to whom we are wonderfully attached, we long for togetherness, we seek to be with, to be important to, it trumps it. But if somebody comes along and tells us to, and it's just, you can experiment with this with somebody's 3.5-year-old. They mustn't know you. You must, get the cooperation of the parents in this case. But get them when they're a little bit feisty, not too tired, and not too hungry, and just do a little experiment. Crumble a piece of paper, put it up on the ground, and then from behind them, no attachment, don't use their name or anything, just put coercion in your face. Now pick up that paper right now and see what that little 3.5-year-old does. What they should do is turn around and say, you can't tell me what to do. You're not the boss of me. You're not my mother. Which is precisely the point. We've all got an instinct that makes us allergic to influence from those to whom we're not attached. Why are we surprised as humans? You see, we thought, 200 years ago, we thought children were evil little critters. Hell-bent on, doing things that destruction and whatever. We needed to rein them in with heavy-handed discipline. And then along came the humanistic revolution. We've all been taught in university that children are inherently good, as if they were born to do our bidding. The actual fact of it is children have instincts to be good, and they have instincts to be bad. But they only feel like being good when they are attached or when their attachment instincts are engaged. So when the teacher says, get that homework in right now, the child works to rule. Does only the minimum possible. When the parent says, don't you dare touch those fireplace utensils, it makes everything in the child want to touch them. When the instincts are not engaged. Do you follow me? And when you say you must eat your peas, but you have not collected that child, got their eyes, we'll talk about that in the second half, their smile, they're not, when they are not actively attaching to you, again, it calls forth all the counter will in them. This is a huge instinct. And when we use consequences, we tell them, this is what I expect of you. And when we're not careful when we do this, when the relationship isn't good, when they're not actively attaching to us and their attaching instincts are not engaged, it actually brings forth the opposite in them. I've had many kids say to me, please tell my parents not to tell me to do homework because when they tell me to do it, I can't. You all know how that feels like. Do you follow me? And yet we keep on doing it. Without realizing that no, the child must be in right relationship with us first. Their attachment instincts actively engaged. You know, all you have to do is to test what I mean. It's the first thing you wake up in the morning. Turn to your spouse and say, now I want you to do this right now. And see how that works. Have a relationship with you, but it doesn't work. Work to do that. And again, we'll talk about that more. It's time for our break. So I'll just finish this up here. The risk to the relationship as it is experienced is adversarial. There's a huge risk to the relationship when children feel as if we're not for them. They need to feel as if we're for them. And it can be highly provocative to an alpha child that is allergic to being ordered around or to consequence. It just makes them trench in even further. They get stuck even further. And it can exacerbate the underlying emotions that underlie the troubling impulses. I outlined this over here. When we use consequences, it increases their frustration. They're confronted with futility, all right, but if they do not find their sadness around this, then it leads to even more aggression. And so we need to be careful with this. The ultimate irony here is that the expert silver bullet, which was supposed to teach a lesson through linking cause and consequence, safely replacing spankings and threats, is neither logical nor rational, has a narrow range of effectiveness, and is riddled with troubling risks. Well, some of you are looking at me and saying, help. You've taken away all my strategies. Oh my goodness. Well, we're not going to end it there. While we have never known more about how the brain works and the conditions required for healthy development, the art of discipline seems no more progressive than the methods of yesteryear. And that brings us to part 2, but let's take a 15-minute break before we go to part 2. Thank you.